In 2015, the World Health Organization listed glyphosate as a probable human carcinogen, meaning that it can probably cause certain types of cancers in humans. This is a chemical widely used in farming practices. Now, when they made this statement, many people protested, saying they didn't have enough scientific evidence to back this up. Most of those protesters came from the Monsanto Corporation. Monsanto markets and sells glyphosate in the form of an herbicide known as Roundup. It permeates the food supply. As an intelligent consumer who is not only concerned about your health, but also the health of your family, stick around as I discuss glyphosate and whether or not you should be concerned about its presence in your food. Hi everybody, I'm Laura Cataract, Master of Science in Human Nutrition and creator of Food Facts Revealed, where we separate fact from fiction in the world of nutrition to help you make better choices about nutrition, food, and your health. Today we're going to talk about glyphosate. Recently, a gentleman out in California won a massive lawsuit against Monsanto Corporation. The jurors in this case overwhelmingly decided that yes, indeed, the chemical glyphosate and their herbicide Roundup played a significant role in the development of this gentleman's cancer. Now, of course, Monsanto is going to appeal this ruling, and what happens in the end remains to be seen. But nevertheless, this is a hot topic right now, and it's one that should have been addressed years ago. And yes, it goes back to the genetically modified food debate. Now, before I go any further, let's make it perfectly clear. This is not about bashing Monsanto. It really is not, okay? There are no easy answers to the food industry and the issues that we're having with the food supply, okay? If you wiped Monsanto off the earth right now, if you magically could do that today, just think about the implications of that. It would be devastating economically. Thousands of jobs would be lost. Billions of dollars would be taken out of the economy. And the food supply, which is largely dependent on their genetically modified corn and genetically modified soy, would dwindle down to nearly nothing but the produce section in your grocery store. This is one of the problems, or at least one of the things that some people see as a huge problem. How can we be so dependent on one corporation? Yet this is what the food industry has evolved into. So before we talk about glyphosate, let's go back and just look at what Monsanto did. I did a couple of videos on genetically modified crops. Some of you may have watched them, maybe not. You can always go back and watch them. But one of the points I was trying to make was that when they genetically modified foods, their biotechnical engineering was much different than other types of what people are now referring to as genetic engineering or genetically modified foods. In fact, I posted one of the videos, the first video, part 1, on my Facebook page, Food Facts Revealed. And there you'll see comments from people because I boosted that post to give it some extra exposure. And I've got some feedback from several people who, were relentless about pointing out that, hey, we've been genetically modifying crops for years, hundreds of years, before Monsanto even existed. And my argument was that, no, we absolutely have not modified crops in the way that Monsanto did it. So before I talk about glyphosate and why it is linked to the genetic modification of the crops that Monsanto produces and sells to the farmers, let's talk about what Monsanto actually did. Okay, so first of all, there's many genetically modified crops, not just soy and corn, but I'm going to focus on the soy and corn because these are the two big major players in the food supply. I mean, everything you eat has traces of these crops in them because the ingredients made or used to make processed foods largely come from the corn and soy, the genetically modified corn and soy. So what did Monsanto actually do to gain this control over the entire food supply pretty much, or just about 78% of the food supply? Basically what they did was they designed seeds, they genetically modified the seeds so that farmers could grow these crops, douse them in herbicide known as Roundup. You may even use Roundup in your own home. You can get it at your home improvement store, hardware store. Many people use it in their gardens. The biggest ingredient in Roundup is glyphosate. So this is the chemical in question. Is it a carcinogen? Is it not a carcinogen? So anyway, they designed these crops, the corn and soy and others, so that the farmers could just drown them in Roundup if they wanted to, and all the weeds and other plants would literally die. I mean, it kills everything except for the genetically modified crops, because they've been built to resist the herbicide. And this is one of the reasons why many insect species that are so important to us are being wiped out of the earth, because, like, for example, the monarch butterflies are it's really scary. Something like 70 or 80% of the population of monarch butterflies has been destroyed because of this herbicide, which destroys the milkweed that they depend on for their survival. And then, of course, there's other chemicals like pesticides and insecticides that, that are destroying the bee population. And these insects are crucial to our own existence, okay? Because in the long run, all life is dependent on the sun and the earth, plants from the earth. That is what sustains all life. So when you start toying with the environment like that and wiping out even insect species, you are affecting the chances of your own survival as a human species. But that's a whole other topic for discussion. So we have these seeds, and let's just say that regular corn, okay, just corn, not genetically modified, but commercial or standard corn crop. Let's just say their DNA, okay, looks like this. Now I'm going to simplify, a complex issue just so you can get the concept, because you deserve to know this and understand this so that you can tell when somebody is not being honest with you in the media. So here we have corn. And just for simplicity's sake, let's say the DNA, the genetic material of corn, if you took it out of the corn, looked like this. That's basically what it looks like. It looks like lines, okay? Lines, black, red, black, red, black, red lines, okay? Now, what Monsanto did was they did not practice genetic modification that has been done for years. This type of genetic modification is quite different, because what they did was they took genetic material from a completely different species. Now, yes, there have been crops that have been technically genetically modified by using hybridization techniques or mutagenesis techniques. In these different techniques, like mutagenesis, they inflict an outside force upon the seeds. So for example, they might take a batch of seeds and irradiate them. So they expose them to radiation. And because of that exposure to radiation, mutations happen in the genes. And some of them are very positive. So the mutations end up causing positive traits in the plants. And then they take those seeds that have mutated into positive traits, and they grow plants from those seeds, and then those seeds survive. Okay, so that is quite different than what Monsanto did. What they did was they took genetic material for their corn specifically from a bacteria, and they took part of this genetic material from the bacteria and put it into the corn's DNA. What this did for the corn crop was it allowed it to act as a pesticide. So when worms and other insects that like to eat corn crops try to eat it, they die, because it's a pesticide and it kills the bugs. Now, in all fairness, most research indicates that eating this corn as humans is not harmful to us. However, this is what it does, and this is not the same, because bacteria, say for simplicity's sake, maybe has DNA that looks like this, okay? Black, red X's. That's the DNA of bacteria. So the GMO corn, or the GM corn, genetically modified corn, maybe for simplicity's sake, looks something like this. So rather than having just the DNA or genetic material from a corn, there is bacteria DNA mixed in there, and it might look something like this. Now, not for nothing, people, but in the world of genetics, this is light years from this, okay? It is astronomically different. You are completely distorting the genetic material to a point where in nature, if there were mutations in the corn's DNA in nature, you could never possibly come up with this. I mean, maybe I shouldn't say never, but chances are it would never happen naturally. Where in something like mutagenesis or hybridization, sure, you might have a different type of corn, but that corn is still going to look something like this. So we're still going to have lines, but maybe their sequence is a little bit different. So you're taking the same genetic material and manipulating it through rearrangement. And also there's a newer technology now called CRISPR. And CRISPR also involves using only the genetic material from that species, from that plant, and rearranging it at will, intentionally rearranging it so that the plant will express the trait that you want. Maybe it makes the fruit bigger, or makes it more tasty, or helps it to express more sugar in it, or things like that. So there's different things. I'm not a geneticist, as you can tell, but this is the gist of it. So as you can see, this, while you might have 2 red lines in a row, 2 black lines in a row, is much different than this, but compared to the Monsanto GM corn, this is just light years away. So it wasn't the same thing what they've done, and it is important to understand that. Because now, in the big picture, when you think about the big picture, who is the real benefactor of these farming practices? You've got Monsanto creating these genetically modified seeds. Why? So that farmers can create higher yields. They're going to yield more crops every year when they buy these seeds. But really, what's happened is Monsanto has the farmers, they are forced to buy the genetically modified seeds. They have literally revolutionized farming overnight because the smaller farmers were wiped out by the hundreds who could not afford to transition to this type of farming. Not everybody had a farm large enough to do this. Not everybody could afford to buy these seeds. And even if they did, if their acreage wasn't large enough, it wasn't worth it to them, because the more you yield, the more bushels of corn you yield, that's how you make your money, the more money you make. So smaller farmers were forced out of business. You've got to buy their seeds. You can't save your seeds. So farmers used to be able to save, wash, and treat their seeds and save them for the next year. They even had people there were small companies who did that, prepared the seeds for the farmers for the next year. You can't do that. It's completely against your contract with Monsanto. You sign a contract with them. And so you have to buy seeds every year. You have to buy their fertilizers every year, and you buy their herbicides every year. And the herbicide Roundup is where the glyphosate comes in. So let's get talking about glyphosate. Okay, so glyphosate is the main ingredient in the herbicide Roundup and in other herbicides used by farmers. It is by far, though, Roundup is the most widely used here in the United States and worldwide. There are over 170 million acres of genetically modified corn and soy just in the United States alone, and we're not the only ones who grow this stuff. Also, as far as Roundup goes, something like 300 billion gallons are used just here in the United States. So you can see, like I was saying earlier, who is benefiting, because you've got your seeds, okay, that you buy, and then you've got your chemicals that you buy, and then the person selling this is Monsanto. Okay, so Monsanto is getting big dollars from all of the farming system, and it's all around the world. And when the World Health Organization deemed glyphosate a potential or a probable human carcinogen, this was a big deal, because Monsanto was like, whoa, wait a minute. Because if we stop the sale of glyphosate, this is going to put a major dent in Monsanto's wallet and a major dent in the entire farming system worldwide, at least the commercial and industrial farming system. Look, when the WHO made this statement, Monsanto came back and said, you don't have the evidence. In fact, what you presented in your monograph, you left out hundreds of studies that we have that show glyphosate is perfectly safe and not harmful and doesn't cause cancer. And the World Health Organization came back and said, yes, we did leave out those studies. And here's why. Now listen to this carefully, because this is very important to see the big picture, to see how the media influences us and all kinds of things, okay? They said, you might read an article and say, oh, well, the WHO, they left out evidence, that wasn't fair. No, they left out evidence that is not made public to other scientists. And that's exactly what they said. They said, yes, we left all of those studies out that you're talking about because they are not for public consumption. Other scientists never saw those studies. They were studies that were performed by Monsanto's own in-house scientists. And this kind of stuff is going on all the time in the food industry and with the chemical companies. They do their own experiments, they conduct their own science, and then they send it to government organizations to say, here's our evidence to prove it's safe. Now, you don't have to know anything about science to realize that if you conduct an experiment on your own, and you want to get a certain result, in other words, showing that glyphosate is safe, you can skew your methods in that experiment to come to that conclusion. This is a fact. All scientists know this. Any academic is going to know this. So that's the problem. This is why I say to people, just because it's in a study, that doesn't mean anything. Did you read the study? Most people cannot read and analyze a study unless they have an advanced education, because that's what college is all about, at least graduate level work, where you're reading and analyzing and evaluating scientific studies. So the problem is, if you're not letting other scientists see what you did, then your work cannot be evaluated by them. And that's the reason they keep this as secret science, so to speak, is because they know if other scientists saw what they did, other scientists would find flaws and they would say, wait a minute, you didn't account for this, and you just used glyphosate alone. You didn't actually test glyphosate when it's with the other chemicals in the herbicide, and there are actually studies that show glyphosate alone does not act the same as it does when it's in the herbicide Roundup. So lots of different things they could have been doing, and this is why the WHO left that literature out. It's amazing how the media can influence how we act and what we believe. It was the same when the documentary came out, OMG GMO. OMG GMO is a documentary about genetically modified food and crops. It's a pretty good documentary, by the way. I do advise it if you've never seen it. So when that came out, everyone started protesting against Monsanto, like, whoa, wait a minute, this whole system, there's something wrong here. As well as they should, because there are significant problems that are being caused to the environment as well as to our health. But then what happened? Well, the big corporations and the big players in this game got subject matter experts to appear on news shows all over the place. Local news stations, national news stations, shows like, Nightly News, 60 Minutes, whatever. Those shows some people consider very prestigious, they're only giving us the truth. So they got these subject matter experts to go on there and interview them about genetically modified crops. And when they're asked, should we be concerned about genetically modified foods? The answer is no. Oh no, we've been genetically modifying food for hundreds of years before Monsanto even came into play, right? So everybody is being bombarded with that information for weeks. Oh, this is ridiculous that people even think this is any big deal, right? Making the consumer, the average consumer, like you and me, believe that what Monsanto did to genetically modify corn and soy is the same that has been going on for 100 years. It is not. That is a lie, and it's a lie that outrages me, because you and I have a right to know that that is not the same, and any respectable scientist is going to tell you it's not the same. And that's all I'm going to say about that ever, well, maybe not ever again, but that's in this video, that's all I'm going to say about that. So, the WHO has evidence. Most of it is animal studies. Some of it, as experiments go, you start in the laboratory. You generally start in what is called in vitro studies. Okay, you culture some cells. You take the chemical that you want to look at, you mix it with these cells, and you see how the cells react. Are there mutations? Do they start growing tumors? Do cancers develop? This is how you start. And then if you see something happening, you take that chemical that you're looking at, in this case Roundup, and you expose it, you expose animals to it, okay? And then you see, do these animals develop cancers? And there is evidence showing that, yes, this can potentially cause cancer. Now, Monsanto is going to come back, and so will other organizations who have an interest in this whole massive conglomerate known as the chemical and food industry, and say, wait a minute, you didn't test this on humans, you know, you don't even know, you say it's a carcinogen, but you can't even tell us what level of exposure causes cancer. You can't prove that if people eat the little trace amounts in the food that they're going to get cancer or that it's harmful, and technically they are right. And this is what the tobacco companies did for years and years and years. Scientists and everybody in the scientific world knew that smoking cigarettes was dangerous to your health or could potentially cause health problems in the future. Now, that doesn't mean everybody who smokes is going to get lung cancer or other diseases. You know, there's different factors, whether you exercise, whether you eat healthy, and what you do. We're finding that out now. But still, we know smoking is not good for your health. And for years, the tobacco companies tried to say, you don't have enough evidence. You can't prove this. These people who got these cancers and these diseases, they might be drinking alcohol, they might be drinking coffee, they might be doing recreational drugs. They could be doing all kinds of things that you didn't account for. You know, but eventually, when better designs were made, scientific designs were made, and after study after study after study, right, you literally had to have hundreds of studies to just get a warning label on the cigarette packs. So this is what we're up against now with the food industry. There's already laws that have been passed in some states limiting you from saying certain things about the food industry. That's why Oprah Winfrey got sued for making a comment about hamburger one year, because she was in a state where one of these laws was in effect, and she ended up winning her lawsuit, but probably only because she's a multi-billionaire herself. You know, if it was someone like you and me, we probably wouldn't have the resources for the lawyers needed to win that lawsuit. And you can Google that. Oprah Winfrey's hamburger comment happened back in the 90s. But anyway, so there, you know, this is why you're going to read conflicting information in this case. It's going to, there's a group of people who have a monetary interest that are going to make sure that it's on blog articles, it's in the local news, it's in the national news, and it's even being put in articles and videos promoted through social media to convince you that the World Health Organization was wrong in their statements, when the World Health Organization has absolutely no interest in whether or not Monsanto sells herbicides to farmers or not. They could care less. They just want to know, is this a potential cancer causing agent, or isn't it? Okay, these organizations, they're not trying to destroy any corporation, right? They are put in place to make sure corporations are keeping the public informed about their products. And even with this, nobody is saying don't produce Roundup anymore. They're simply calling for warning labels so that the farmers who are exposed to this chemical at massive doses day in and day out during certain times of the year, when they're throwing it on the crops, can know to protect themselves somehow. Wear breathing protection or even skin protection. Cover your skin. Many things can be absorbed through the skin. So no one is saying stop making this stuff even. And it really gets ridiculous how adamant the corporations and the big players can be about keeping the public informed. They try to say, we want people to know the truth so they're not scared or freaking out for no reason. But really, They don't want us to know the truth because clearly they don't want to label genetically modified foods. They don't want to label potentially dangerous chemicals, substances. It's just a lot of hogwash going on. So in my opinion, is glyphosate dangerous to your health? Probably. And I say very likely. There's a very high probability that eating this stuff is not good, and we do eat it, and here's how we eat it. Everything in the processed food aisles, which is pretty much 80% of the supermarket, okay? Processed foods are everywhere. Most people still don't even know what processed food is compared to whole food. We are hearing now, eat a whole foods diet. Most consumers, and I'm not just talking about uneducated people, I'm talking about very intelligent, highly educated people with advanced degrees. I have talked literally to medical doctors who have asked me, what do you mean by whole foods? This is how distorted it has all become for us. This is how misinformed we are. Whole foods are foods that you find in nature. They're plants, they're vegetables, they're fruits, they're nuts, they're seeds, okay? They're meats from clean sources. Glyphosate is going to be in any processed food that uses ingredients from genetically modified corn or genetically modified soy, and that is almost everything. It's salad dressings, it's condiments, it's your boxed flavored pastas, anything flavored. It's flavor packaging. Okay, I'm going to read to you. I have a site up here which lists just some of the ingredients that you can make from genetically modified corn. There's thousands. I think there's something like 3,000 different food ingredients that can be made from genetically modified corn alone. But some of them are baking powder. You can actually make that from cornstarch, okay? Calcium citrate. Would you think calcium citrate is made from corn? Probably not, but it can be, and it is. Cellulose. Cellulose can be made from genetically modified corn. Ascorbic acid, which is vitamin C. Now, once you make ascorbic acid, it is vitamin C, but you can make it from genetically modified corn, and whether or not trace amounts of glyphosate are in these ingredients, really, I'm not sure it matters, because even if there isn't, okay, buying products in which the supply chain leads back to genetically modified crops is supporting this whole skewed farming system. And that's why we encourage people, get non-GMO, look for that non-GMO label. There's a lot of environmental issues going on, like I said, that forget about the human health issues. There's this whole environmental issues. I mean, soil is being destroyed at what environmentalists consider alarming rates. And if we destroy the topsoil, we think of soil, somebody who's not a farmer, as just dirt. But talk to a farmer about the value of their soil. They will tell you soil is not just dirt. Soil is a living, breathing organism, and it's vital to all life. There's organisms in the soil and microorganisms and microbes that are vital to the plant and the plant life and the nutrient content. And this is all the land is being stripped of all kinds of nutrients because of chemicals like glyphosate. So whenever you buy things with genetically modified ingredients in them, we are supporting this system. And I'll be honest, it's hard to go completely GMO free because it's out of control. They're everywhere. And just to continue, of course, corn syrup, high fructose corn syrup, those definitely come from genetically modified corn. You've got maltodextrin. This is a link of sugar molecules that is found in a lot of snack foods now, like flavored potato chips, pretzels, crackers, cookies, maltodextrin. Dextrose, your artificial sweeteners like sucralose, aspartame, the list goes on and on and on. Polydextrose, powdered sugars, saccharin, xanthan gum, it's just unbelievable. They make everything from this stuff, this corn and soy. Are you eating glyphosate? Yes. There have been scientific studies which are actually accessible to people like you and me. I don't know if people are aware of this, but if you're not a college student, if you're not an academic or a scientist yourself, we don't have access to all of the scientific studies. scientists do, and so do scholars, because you'll have access to your university's library or the online library as long as you're active in school. Now, someone like you and me, there's only certain studies that are available to the public, but there are actually some studies where they found Roundup in human blood, and you can Google it, Roundup in human blood, and you'll get some stuff. Like, you can use scholar.google.com or PubMed to try to research things if you want to look up scientific studies. Again, sometimes you just get access to the abstract. You can't read the whole study, but many studies, there are some that are available to us. And those are some of them, the ones that indicate, there's glyphosate in the human body, and there's trace amounts that we're eating every day from these processed foods. So it is another reason to stay away from processed food. Okay, so the big question, does glyphosate cause cancer? I'm not one who's going to answer that because I haven't looked at all of the research. I'm sure the World Health Organization had very good grounds to make the statement they did when they classified it as a probable human carcinogen. And of course, the lawsuit was won. It did go before jurors who had evidence to show that Roundup most likely played a substantial role in the development of this one gentleman's cancer, who was a farmer. Now, you got to remember, the farmers are exposed to the chemicals at much higher levels than you and I. So what levels are safe, we don't really know. That is a very hard thing to prove and indicate. I mean, think about it. What are you going to do? Take a group of humans and feed them glyphosate or Roundup until they develop cancer to see how much it takes? These studies are almost impossible to design. It's not that science doesn't give us the evidence and the information we need to know the things we know. It's just sometimes it has limitations because of design. Some designs are just not ethical. You can't ask people to eat a substance where in vitro studies and animal studies all point to a cancer causing agent. That's just not ethical. But even if it did not, even if the level of exposure we have, and it's going to be different from person to person. Someone like myself who rarely eats processed foods is eating a lot less glyphosate. I might be getting some from cross-contamination, but when you're eating organics and when you're eating non-GMO foods, you're not going to be exposed to it like someone who just doesn't care what they eat. It's this, and animals, animals, this is why I preach eat clean meats. Grass-fed beef, truly pastured chicken that have not been raised in CAFOs. CAFOs are concentrated or consolidated animal feeding operations. I had the pleasure to speak to a gentleman whose job it was to inspect CAFOs. He worked for a company that raises pigs and makes hams. They sell hams, a very famous ham company. So it was very interesting talking to him. I got a little insight in what it's like from his side and how what they think about the whole system. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about that today. So anyway, animals raised in these CAFOs are all eating genetically modified grain. And of course, they're eating the glyphosate, and this can be in their tissue, and so then you're eating it. So it's potentially you're getting it from meats that are not clean, and there's other chemicals you're getting. Forget about the fact that feeding cows corn completely destroys the nutritional value of the meat anyway. I mean, yeah, there is some nutritional value in that meat, but it's not the same. You've heard how the omega-6 and omega-3 ratio is skewed when you feed cows corn. Yes, but that's only a small part of the problem. It's a problem with meat from cows raised in CAFOs, but other problems include the fact that the antioxidant level in that meat is virtually gone. Grass-fed beef has many vitamins and minerals that you do not get from CAFO raised cows. So it's really important. Clean meats and birds too, chickens and turkeys and even pigs. You make sure these animals are raised in environments as close to the natural environment as possible and are not eating genetically modified grain. It makes a difference. And proteins, we hear about good fats, good carbs, bad carbs. Nobody talks about good protein, bad protein, but I can assure you the quality of proteins is like night and day between the animals you're eating in restaurants and the supermarket than what you can get from a clean meat source, whether it's a local farm or now they've got many people online selling clean meats. And if you research this for yourself and you're not sure if a company is really selling you true clean meats, you can always contact me. You can reach me at foodfactsrevealed@gmail.com. I will be glad to answer any questions or leave a comment. Ask questions in the comments of the video and I'll be glad to answer any questions you have. But whether or not this causes cancer, the thing is, now we're finding it might cause other problems, like in the gut microbiome. Anytime you eat foreign substances like this, you are distorting your gut microbiome. And there is some research, I'm not very familiar with it. I just came across this the other day when I was doing some research before I shot this video, showing that some scientists are now wondering if celiac disease is more largely related to glyphosate exposure in grains, because apparently many of the cereal grains, including wheat, are soaked in glyphosate before the farmer grows them. This isn't for herbicide purposes, but it helps the seeds grow quicker or mature quicker, and they can be harvested earlier apparently. So again, I'm not a farmer, but this is just briefly, I was reading an article, and there is some research that shows glyphosate, when you eat it, causes similar symptoms of celiac disease. It changes the gut microbiome. It causes nutrient deficiencies, particularly in metals like molybdenum, magnesium, zinc. Apparently, it can act like a chelator, chelation agent. Binds minerals. So this is all not good. Even if you're not going to get cancer from it, this is, can cause leaky gut syndrome, and that can lead to autoimmune disease, allergies, different, thyroid conditions. So all these chronic diseases that are becoming more and more popular these days seem to be linked to a lot of these different chemicals that we're ingesting. Because you got to remember, if you're eating processed food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and you're eating animals every day from sources that aren't clean, then you're continuously putting trace amounts of these dangerous chemicals into your system. So again, one more piece of the puzzle for you to see the big picture and see that there really is a massive problem with the food supply right now in the food industry. Again, how do we avoid it? Buy from local farmers. Go to the local farmer markets in the summer and the spring when it's in season, when you can. Look for clean sources of meat. It is not expensive to grow old. It's expensive to grow sick. Much more expensive to grow sick than it is to buy good quality, healthy food. If you can't transition to a whole foods diet completely overnight, I get it. I didn't even do that myself when I started transitioning to a whole foods diet. There's lots of things to take into consideration. What you actually can eat every day, how you replace the foods you already eat, and the cost. I'm a very realistic person. I understand we're not all going to be perfect, but just doing one thing different than you did today, or one thing different than you did yesterday. Buy something organic that you didn't buy yesterday. Start buying something cheap that's organic, like bananas. Start researching clean meats. See if you can afford maybe to make at least one meal a week from clean meats. Everything makes a difference. It matters to your health, and it matters to your family's health. It does make a difference. And when you transition to a whole foods diet, the way you feel, the way you are in not just physically but psychologically, it is just so great. You are never going to want to go back to the ways that you have today. I promise you that. So with that being said, do the best you can. But if you're concerned, then now you have more information to help you get a start and what to look for. So until next time, remember, love yourself enough to eat whole foods. Eat real food.